Hi, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to give you 4 alternative horror double bills for your Halloween. What I'm doing is I'm pairing kind of one quite well-known movie with a lesser-known movie that kind of complements it and shows you a different way of thinking about it. And I think this will give you a great alternative night on your Halloween night. So first of all, I'm going to start by pairing John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness with the movie The Borderlands. Now, John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness is very much influenced by Nigel Neal, and it's about science and religion coming together to defeat an ancient evil. The ancient evil in this case is a canister of green goo at the bottom of this church in this rundown area of, it looks like Detroit, but it's probably LA. And what Donald Pleasance, the priest, has found is that this has been there since the year 1500, and the Catholic Church have kept this secret, that they knew of this kind of extraterrestrial artifact, and they knew of its presence, and they knew it was supposed to be the devil, but they've kept it secret for hundreds of years. And Donald Pleasance invites a series of physicists and chemists into the church to experiment and see what this thing is, but they are held under siege because the thing is waking up, and it gets the local homeless population, it takes control of them, and they're held under siege. So it's a base under siege film. But what I find interesting about it is its theme. And the theme of it is that science through the 20th century, at least according to John Carpenter, in looking at quantum mechanics and going deeper into the actual matter of the universe, it's found that when you go deep into the matter of the universe, the normal laws of physics as we understand them don't pertain. So, for example, when you talk about tachyonics, they can move faster than light and may seem to go back in time, that sort of thing. So suddenly physics becomes nonsense. And similarly, Donald Pleasance finds that the religion that he's followed, Catholicism, for all these years, actually is one big lie. That the Catholic Church knew that there was a physical reality, a physical evil, but they thought no one would believe in it, so they instead asked them to believe in the evil in their own hearts. So it's a wonderful little play, that the way that science in finding out more actually comes to nothing, and religion in finding out more finds it comes to something, an actual artifact. And that's one of the interesting themes explored by Carpenter in this mostly very fun movie. Now this movie, The Borderlands, is a recent found footage horror film, which I know is not everyone's cup of tea. I quite like found footage horror movies, but I know not everyone likes them, shaky camera and all that. But it's an interesting film, this, and I think it uses the found footage in a really interesting thematic way. It's the right format for the film. It's made by a first-time director called Elliot Goldner. It's very cheap and cheerful and British. It's known in America by the name Final Prayer, which is a dreadful title. It's got nothing to do with the movie. But the basic idea of the film is this. The Vatican has been contacted by the vicar of an English church, right? And the vicar of the English church has claimed a miracle has happened in his church. And the Vatican has to explore every kind of miracle. So they send along 3 guys, a priest, someone who regularly works for the Vatican, and a techno guy to work out what's happening in this church. And the techno guy is an atheist. He doesn't really believe in religion. But he's the one who starts to believe that something is happening. And he asks the other guys, all your religion, and that's true of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, is built on things that cannot be seen and cannot be proved. And they replaced religions like paganism, which were all based on nature, things that could be seen and could be proved. And the brilliance of this film and why the found footage is so good is it moves towards an ending of the very, very palpable. Right? A lot of people don't like the ending. A lot of people don't even understand what's going on in the ending. I love it. I think it's one of the most original and brave and bold endings in recent horror cinema. And it goes back to what Carpenter was discussing in Prince of Darkness. This idea of science and religion moving towards a point of total, palpable knowledge, not faith. So they're quite an interesting pair. So I think if you put them together this Halloween, you'll have an interesting experience. Next up, we're going to talk about David Cronenberg's Dead Ringers, which was one of my favourite films for the longest time. Well-known film about 2 twins who are gynecologists, both played brilliantly by Jeremy Irons, one of his best performances. And one of them meets a new patient, played by Genevieve Bujold, who has rather unusual anatomy. We won't go into that. And it's a Cronenberg film. And falls in love with her. And that starts to deteriorate the relationship between the two twins. It's not so much a horror film, it's a genuinely haunting and disturbing film. But I'd like to pair it with another film about twins, which is less well known, called The Other. This was directed by Robert Mulligan. It has a wonderful, beautiful, haunting score by Jerry Goldsmith. And on the surface, it's quite a pleasant little film. A kind of piece of quaint, what the Americans call Southern Gothic. I never really understood what that phrase meant, but there it is. It's a Southern Gothic. About this family living in a farmhouse out in the sticks. And the boy is troubled. There is an implication that his twin brother has died, but he keeps talking to him. They have a relationship. And the brother has a malign influence on him. And this leads to death and to murder. It's not a gross-out horror film. It's not a terrifying horror film. But I guarantee you it will haunt you for days. It's beautifully directed by Mulligan. It's very intelligent, very well written, very well acted. And it was a surprise to me. I wasn't expecting much from it. But I think it's one of the most memorable films of that era I've ever seen. And it's a really good complement to the discussion of twins that you find in the Cronenberg movie. Next, we turn to the subject of vampirism, always a popular subject with horror directors. I'm going to share with you two very unusual vampire movies from America in the 1970s that are perhaps not so well known. The first is Ganja and Hess. I find it amazing that this film isn't so well known. What happened was there was a producer at the time who wanted to cash in on the blaxploitation fad in the 70s, movies for a new black audience, often sort of detective dramas, or giving it to the man kind of dramas. And he wanted to do a blaxploitation vampire movie. He wanted to do a sort of black alternative to Dracula. And he hired a guy called Bill Gunn, who was an actor, writer, director. And Bill Gunn had other ideas, and he took the money and he took the job. But he produced what can only be described really as an art film, a very unusual film, very independent, strange film about this black American professor who is struck, he's knifed by a friend of his who then promptly commits suicide. And it's a ceremonial dagger from Africa that gives him a craving for blood. And really, the film turns out to be about addiction, right? This sort of the vampire theme is really a sort of metaphor for addiction and how he has to feed this addiction. But also how this stabbing of an African dagger also gives him dreams and mirages of Africa and makes him reflect on his own relationship with Africa. And then the man's wife turns up looking for him and they begin this rather odd relationship. It's a one-off film. You will never have seen anything like it. It's very wry. It's got a feminist gag right at the end with a wink. It's mysterious, it's haunting, it's funny. I can't put it into words how strange this movie is, but it really should be better known. It's a real one-off. It's one of the great American art films of the 70s and deserves to be better known, I think. And so does this. George Romero's Martin. Now, if you only know George Romero through his zombie movies, you're missing out. This is one of the best vampire films in cinema history. It's about a young, lonely teenager in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is beautifully shot in this film. God, it's hauntingly shot with all these abandoned buildings by the rail yards and everything. And he's got a craving to kill and to drink blood. And it's very sensitively and intelligently written and directed. It doesn't go for the obvious exploitative, side of things. It's actually a very intelligent and haunting film about a boy who's clearly in trouble. Both of these films use vampirism to get at more serious subject matter. And I can't tell you how impressed I was by this film. I remember in the 80s there was lots of movies came along like Near Dark, for example, and The Lost Boys that sort of resurrected vampirism. And these two movies got completely forgotten, and they're two of the best movies about vampirism ever made. So do try them this Halloween. I guarantee you'll have a very alternative Halloween night. And finally, we return to a very famous film, Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, which is, let's face it, the high watermark of films about witchcraft and demonology, and one of the best horror films ever made. It stars a very young and beautiful and brilliant Mia Farrow as a young woman who moves into an apartment complex in New York with the horrible John Cassavetes, and he gets friendly with the local people in the apartment block who just happen to be Satanists, and they want the devil to have sex with her and make her pregnant. And the film follows her through the next grueling 9 months as she realises that something is terribly wrong, and she becomes more and more suspicious of her husband and his friends. It's actually a really lip-licking satire on the men and women at the time around pregnancy, and it's very modern. The problem with this film is that now, in the modern era, it feels dated, right? But if you look at it in terms of the 1960s, it is so modern in its treatment of sex, the modern relationship, the way, for example, John Cassavetes and Mia Farrow have sex at the beginning of the movie. Instead of it being loving or sexy, it just goes into the relentless, 2 minutes of them just taking their clothes off really awkwardly, getting the socks off, getting the shoes off, all that sort of stuff. Kind of stuff that hadn't really been done before. And I think people miss just how modern, this film was. It's a real masterpiece if you've never seen it before. The direction, the pacing, everything is absolutely spot on. But it wasn't that original. People don't know this. But there was a movie that preempted it, The Seventh Victim. This movie came out in the 1940s, and it was part of the Val Lewton cycle. Now, the Jacques Tourneur films like Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie are more famous. This was directed by Mark Robson, who I think is the unsung hero of the Val Lewton movies. He was a good director in his own right, perhaps not Tourneur, but he was effective. And he made this little movie, The Seventh Victim. It's only about an hour long, and it's really intriguing. It's about a young 15-year-old schoolgirl, and her sister vanishes, and she has to go looking for her in New York, and she meets all these people who could be friends, could be enemies, and eventually she tracks her sister to this group of upper-class Manhattanites, very suave, very urbane, very sophisticated, who just happen to be Satanists. And it's that nature, that sort of muted, sophisticated nature of looking at devil worship, that means that this film is a progenitor of Rosemary's Baby. It's also a progenitor of Psycho by Hitchcock. There is a shower scene where the young girl is in the shower and you see through the curtain some malevolent figure moving towards her. It's all there. And this film is barely remembered now, but it's a fantastic little horror movie. It anticipated two of the most important horror movies of the 60s and two of the most important horror movies ever made. So this Halloween, stick on Rosemary's Baby, and then stick on The Seventh Victim and see what you make of them. Whatever you watch this Halloween, have a great time, and I hope you get thoroughly spooked. All right, bye.